friends, welcome back. Today I will continue my discussion where I am discussing about methods adopted in social psychology. Previously we discussed about grounded theory. Today I will talk about focus group. This is one of the most recent qualitative research methodology that is being practiced, that is being followed in area of social sciences. So, focus group is another method of qualitative analysis which was originally developed in the field of sociology to understand society and other kind of problems that are prevalent in social groups. So, Paul Lazarsfeld and others later introduced this technique in the area of marketing, and later on it was popularized by Robert Merton in his book while working on this methodology, that is focus group. So, focus group is also used by sociologists, psychologists, researchers in communication and media studies, education, political science, feminist research and public health, where most of the time the experiences are being recorded, they are being transcribed to understand that how people resolve their problems, what kind of problems people confront in their day to day life. It can be about public health, it can be about an individual physical illness or any terminal illness that a person suffers from. It can be about day to day life and how people try to cope while sharing or recording their experiences. So, focus group is a small group of people, maybe about 6 to 8 participants, who usually share particular characteristics about themselves and share their experiences with each other, and those experiences can be about person suffering from any kind of chronic illness. It can be mothers of children who encounter some day to day life problems, such as especially of working mothers, such as work life balance, or how they try to maintain a balance based on child care services which are very much available in their community, and to what extent they are satisfied, dissatisfied, or they are encountering some problems regarding those community services. It can also be about any woman who is suffering from any cancer and what kind of feelings she has and how she has coped up with all these kind of problems throughout her treatment. So, when 2 or 6 or 8 people come together and share their experiences while being giving their consent to be the participant of that group, then it forms a focus group while focusing only on a pertinent problem. So, focus group encourages informal group discussion. There is no rules, there are no norms that how the discussion has to be initiated, but it is completely initiated based on natural course of interaction. So, the discussion is focused around a particular topic which I mentioned just now. It can be a particular topic or it can be a set of issues. For example, young women sharing experiences of dieting, single parent evaluating childcare facilities available in their community itself, or fitness instructors comparing and contrasting training regimes, that which kind of exercises or dieting plans are more effective or in favor or against. So, when all these problems are being shared or experiences are being shared by participants, it leads to an explosion to a different kind of experiences, and how the researcher tries to record and transcribe and give meaning to those experiences. So, the focus or objective analysis is completely based on interaction inside the group and how participants influence each other to answer to the ideas and contribute during the discussion. So, the one particular topic that has been chosen instigates or triggers the participants to unleash or unfold their experiences, and how people tend to maintain a kind of interaction which gives direction to the problem and at the same time solution to the problem. So, when we are talking about focus group, the most important thing is that a focus group also consists of a moderator who initiates or stimulates the discussion along with comments, and in the end of the discussion the moderator actually reflect, record and transcribe all the experiences and the annotations as well. Annotations here means that how the experiences are being shared with different kind of emotions and feelings that participants experience. So, the general characteristics of focus group are people's involvement, a series of meetings and homogeneity of the participants. For example, a group of mothers who are participating as member of the focus group, and they are belonging to the age same group, they are working, all are working, and how they are facing any particular problem related to childcare facilities in their community. So, there has to be some kind of homogeneity related to the participant, and how the moderator tend to initiate or stimulate that research interest or discussion on the research interest. So, this generates a qualitative data which is being focused and discussed and is determined by the researcher. Therefore, we can say that a focus group is one where 6 or 8 participants are part of that group. They are focusing on a particular problem or a problem or topic of interest, and the interaction is stimulated by the moderator who records, transcribes the data, and which is completely qualitative in nature. There are no quantifiable data that is very much prevalent in that discussion, and it is completely based on interaction among members. So, although focus groups are sometimes also referred as group interviews, which are very much similar, that how people are sitting all together and they are discussing on a particular topic, but at the same time the moderator does not ask the question. So, this is a thin line difference between a focus group and a group interview. In an interview, there has to be one person who is named as designated as interviewer, who will ask question from the participants or the members of the group. But in focus group, the moderator will stimulate the discussion, but he or she as a moderator will not ask any question from the participant, rather facilitates group discussion, actively encourage members to interact with each other. The more the interaction is stimulated or encouraged, the more the members are encouraged to share their experiences. So, focus groups may be reconvened at the later date. For instance, if any study is a longitudinal study where lot of interactions are required, lot of data, qualitative data is required, and one discussion is not enough, then the discussion of the focus group can be reconvened or rescheduled to come to the conclusion of the discussion and come out with an outcome which actually specifies the research interest of the subject. In a focus group, the discussion is recorded, the data is transcribed, which is the most important part of focus group. When we talk about focus group, it is not only about the sharing the experiences. The experiences are being recorded and transcribed with some specific meaning and analyzed, and those meanings are being analyzed based on certain themes. That means, certain aspect of behavior or responses in the discussion dominates the discussion, and that becomes the theme of that comes out to be the theme of that discussion or the focus group discussion. So, those transcriptions or the text that has been transcribed in form of qualitative data are being analyzed based on conventional analytical methods, and those responses are being coded and given a thematic analysis is being performed to understand the whole discussion. So, here when the responses are being collected, they are being given specific meaning to those particular words, phrases or discussion, and those discussions or words which are dominated in the discussion, that part or discussion becomes the theme of that focus group. So, thematic analysis is a method for analyzing qualitative data that involves reading through a set of data and looking for pattern in the meaning of the data to find themes. That's what it is here, that how a theme is being identified. When this particular discussion, in a particular discussion, when some topic is being dominated by the members in the discussion, but that becomes the major theme of the group focus group. Next comes analyzing focus group data in social sciences. According to Wilkinson, he is a profound sociologist, has identified that how come qualitative analysis is so distinctive from quantitative analysis, and that distinction has been identified by Wilkinson based on the method of data collection and not on analysis of data in the initial stages of group discussion. Generally, in the traditional way of analyzing the data, the researcher focuses on how to analyze the data. Once we collect the data, we our major focus becomes how to analyze, but in qualitative analysis the most important thing is how to collect data rather than analyzing, because collecting qualitative data requires lot of patience. So, that requires in-depth analysis of the responses of the participants, and how that responses emphasize to run an effective focus group rather than how to analyze the resulting data. Because when we are making an in-depth analysis of the qualitative data, then so many responses are there is no streamlining of the responses. Later on it becomes the responsibility of the researchers to streamline each and every response and giving some significant meaning to those responses. So, according to Wilkinson, focus groups are distinctive in nature primarily for the method of data collection, that is informal group discussion. For instance, one particular topic can be a group of women participating in discussion who are suffering from breast cancer. Every woman will have a very different kind of experience based on right from knowing that that after diagnosis every woman, how she would react, how what kind of pain she has gone through throughout the treatment she has gone through. So, all these experiences will vary from one woman to another woman. So, all these responses become, collecting all these responses becomes very difficult for the researcher to analyze and then bringing it into a theme. So, this requires, rather than for the method of data collection, it is perhaps which leads to the accounts of the method to emphasize how to run an effective focus group rather than how to analyze the resulting data. So, this data that is being collected becomes an in-depth analysis which is then pertains to data analysis. So, data collection is very important according to Wilkinson when we are talking about focus group. So, there are three main methods to analyze focus group data. There can be different ways to analyze qualitative data in focus group itself based on group discussion. The first is quantitative content analysis, the other is qualitative thematic analysis, and the third is constructionist methods. So, I will discuss about quantitative content analysis first of all. So, this is completely based on the theme of content analysis, which is the examination of data from recurrent instances of some kind. I will take up the same example of a group of women, focus group of women who suffered from breast cancer, and what kind of recurrent responses they are giving pertaining to their experiences when they have gone through the treatment for cancer treatment. So, there can be some recurring responses of the whole group or recurring responses of one particular woman, and that becomes the content of that discussion. So, these instances are then systematically organized and identified across the data set and grouped together by means of coding system. That means, one woman would say with recurring instances of responses that I felt utter pain in a particular stage of treatment. The another woman would also comply and she would also respond in the similar way. When all these data are collected in one stream, then a kind of theme and coding is being used to analyze that content, because those responses are content, full of meaning in nature, and how those meanings are coming out of those discussions. So, this is qualitative content analysis, and all these common meanings are being grouped together under one theme. So, coding is very important about qualitative content analysis. So, since we are talking about qualitative content analysis and it pertains to coding system, it is irrespective that what kind of responses do we have. It can be a type of instance, for example, word, it can be a phrase which has a specific meaning at group level also and at individual level. And every time the group is coming out with one recurrent use of word or phrase, that forms the theme, that forms coding. And if it is a particular woman who is recurring or repeating one particular word in the discussion, then that also becomes a code to understand the meaning of that word, the in-depth meaning that lies behind or beyond. The other is the preferred label for such instances. It can be theme, it can be item, or it can be a discourse. Now, once a particular word has been identified that the group is focusing on one particular word again and again when they are sharing their experiences, those experiences can also be labeled as theme. For example, pain, or it can be chemotherapy. Every time the responses are or the experiences are related to chemotherapy, which is becoming a recurring word in the discussion, then that becomes a theme, and how responses are being collected under that particular theme. So, it can be a label, or it can be theme, item, or discourse. Discourse here means the text, the speech, the sign, that it can be a body language also, or sign, that how participants are responding or sharing their experiences based on that. The other is whether the instances are subsequently grouped into larger units or variously labeled categories organizing themes, interpreted repertoire. Here interpretive repertoire means that every time the responses that are being revealed or given to the researcher or even to the moderator, they have a specific meaning attached to it, and it is reflecting on to the other responses as well. So, here interpretive repertoire means that a researcher even has freedom to attach different meanings to one kind of response, that is interpretive repertoire, interpreting one particular response in various ways. That is another perspective of qualitative content analysis. So, whenever we are talking about qualitative content analysis, it can be a word in form of instance, it can be a label or a theme, and it can be a interpretive repertoire or identifying one major theme, that what responses are coming from a particular discussion. So, this can be a larger unit as well. So, this is how qualitative content analysis is being performed. But at the same time, it also requires and involves certain stages. The first is deciding on a unit of analysis. Unit of analysis here means whether it has to be a particular person or it can be a group of people. Now, how those group of people or a particular individual is responding or sharing his experiences, those utterances, how those responses are coming from the nodal point. Nodal point here means the unit of analysis. The other is developing a coding system. Once the researcher starts receiving different kind of experiences and responses pertaining to one particular topic of research, then it is a point where all the responses are being identified and they are being coded. Coded here means that giving one category to one particular kind of responses, and then through coding comes different kind of responses. The other is applying codes. Now, developing a coding system and applying codes goes hand in hand. It is a process of labeling and organizing your qualitative data to identify different themes and the relationship between them. There can be a number of codes, number of responses, they are being categorized into number of codes, and then under those codes comes different kind of themes. For instance, I will continue the example of a group of women who are suffering or who suffered from breast cancer. Maybe the common theme can be of pain and the other theme can be of treatment. Under that treatment, different kind of codings can be done and different kind of themes can evolve. So, this is how coding and thematic analysis goes hand in hand. Coding is very important. Once this coding has been analyzed, that this is the code for pain, this is the code for treatment, and this is the code for treatment by the doctor or relationship with the doctor. So, these three codes have been identified, and under these codes what kind of responses have been collected. So, the researcher can identify different kinds of painful experiences under one code, different kind of painful treatment or experiences of treatment can be identified under one code, and different kind of experiences with the patient and doctor relationship can be identified under one code. So, there has a relationship among all the codes: treatment, pain, and the relationship with the doctor. They are so interwoven into each other that there has to be a relationship in all the three codes. So, this is how coding is done, or we apply codes to the responses. And other thing is that using simple tabulations of instances of codes. For example, we can give some frequency or number of responses given by one particular participant in the focus group discussion. Here the tabulation is being done based on frequency, that what kind of word is being continuously used by one particular focus group participant. For example, any one participant, woman participant, would use a word under the code pain. Now, this pain word can have a different connotations for all the different members. So, how we are giving those tabulated number to those frequencies, it can also be a part of qualitative content analysis. It can also be about liking and disliking. When a group of people who are discussing on a particular topic, then we can also identify the nature of relationship among the members, that A likes B, A likes C, A likes D. So, there can be a frequency or tabulated form of understanding the relationship among A, B, C and D. So, this is how we do engage in qualitative content analysis, which entails words, which entails phrases, which entails some themes or items or discourses, and when they are grouped in as a unit of analysis. Next comes qualitative thematic analysis. As the term implies, thematic analysis is a quantitative data analysis method that involves reading through a data set such as transcripts from the in-depth interviews or focus group and identifying patterns in meaning across data to derive themes. All the responses has been collected through group discussions and interviews. Different kind of transcripts have been received by the researcher, and how the researcher makes different meaning out of those transcripts, that creates different kind of themes to study further. So, this is the base of qualitative thematic analysis. Qualitative thematic analysis are designed to give access to how the social world is lived, not simply how people talk about it to researchers. It is not only about just interacting or responding to the moderator or to the interviewer. It is about recording of the responses of the subjects in a way where they reflect the real meaning, that how the world moves or how the social world moves. It can be any social problem, it can be any social issue, that how people come to live with those problems, resolve, experience, and then come out of those aspects. So, this is the major focus of qualitative thematic analysis. So, thus qualitative focus group studies aim to provide contextual interpretive accounts of people's social worlds. It is about the account, it is a social account of every person, be it a group of 7 people, 8 people or 20 people. Every particular participant has a different social account. They have a different experience about the society, they have a different experience about social problems, they have a different experience for any social issue, they have any different experiences of any community in which they live, how they adjust, how they cope up, how they resolve any problem. That is completely different from one person to another, and those interpretations are so different that we can create one single social account of one particular member, and then combining those experience to make it as a unit at a larger perspective. For example, what a participant in the context of the focus group discussion is taken as revealing, they are revealing obviously, and the nature of the daily life for people with chronic physical illness. They are revealing about their experiences, that how much pain they have gone through when they were suffering from a particular chronic illness. It can be about a social problem as well. It can be a flagging up a significant issue in the life territory of the drug experienced young person, any teenager who was a drug addict, and when he was sent to rehabilitation center. So, there was a constrained lifestyle, and how he has lived up that constrained life, that becomes a revealing of the experience, and those experiences are being themed under different headings. So, this is the aspect, this is how we perform any qualitative thematic analysis. In other words, the talk is used as a means of access to something that lies behind or beyond it. What a particular participant is revealing, it is actually an access to information for the researcher, which gives a more clear picture of what can be ahead and what was behind those interactions. How the subject is revealing his experiences in different words. It can be utterances, it can be words, it can be phrases, it can be some episodic event which shook an individual's life, and how he or she has gone through that pain and came out from that process. So, this is a means of access to the researcher. Therefore, we can say that thematic analysis is a method for analyzing qualitative data that involves reading through a set of data and looking for patterns in the meaning of the data and find themes. Any teenager who has gone to rehabilitation center to cope up with drug addiction, there has to be a pain, there has to be a discipline, there has to be a lifestyle change. What he or she has gone through, that lifestyle changes and pain, that gives in-depth meaning to an individual's responses. That is the subject of interest in qualitative thematic analysis. At the same time, there are certain features of qualitative thematic analysis. It tries to find out the participants' lives through what they say within the focus group, as it is the focus of the study. It aims to ground interpretation in the particularities of the situation under study and in participants' perspective. A situation and the perspective of the participant. There is a strong relationship. Maybe that relationship is negative or positive, but when situation and participant is there, definitely the response is true. That can be very much easily revealed in thematic analysis. Its data are generally presented as accounts of social phenomena or social practices, substantiated by illustrative quotations from the focus group discussion. Sometimes people mark those responses with some specific idea or thought that marks the account, social account of the individual, and the researcher can easily interpret the in-depth meaning that is being given by the participant in that discussion. So, whenever the participant is responding to any situation or event, that is actually the true reflection of the practices, social practices that he or she lives in his daily life, and how the person is living with those practices and how he or she is coping up with those social practices. Those practices can be good or bad, but when it comes to reflection of your own experiences, pain, then it is actually a social account of that person. That social account becomes the area of interest of the researcher. So, this is about qualitative thematic analysis. I will continue about focus group in the next class. Thank you.